Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Bob Duff, and this is the HockeyDebates.com podcast. And our special guest today is Helene St. James, the beat writer for the Detroit Free Press, for the Detroit Red Wings. And it's a pretty opportune time to have Helene on the broadcast because there's been a lot of discussion about moving the draft. And what I find really curious about all this is the general manager. Now, a lot of general managers are opposed to moving the draft to early June because we're going to have to change the rules for the draft. We don't even have it settled what the draft order should be, and there's probably going to be some unfairness in how they end up because we don't really know what's going to happen if we resume the season. So general managers are against this, but the league wants to do it because they feel like they need a boost in terms of getting the NHL brand out there. And they also saw the NFL draft, and that did really well. Now, the curious aspect to me is that if there's one team that will benefit greatly by moving it to June and changing the rules to the old format, it would be the Detroit Red Wings. But who's against it and who has come out and said he doesn't understand why we would do this? None other than Steve Yzerman, the general manager of the Detroit Red Wings. And Helene, obviously, if we go to the old rules, the worst the Red Wings can pick is second, under the new system, the worst they could pick is fourth. Sort of explain why Steve is unhappy with the rules, and to be fair, a lot of general managers are unhappy with the possibility of moving it to early June.
Well, I think part of it is probably the uncertainty, or is it going to be guaranteed that they could pick no worse than second? If I'm a general manager of a team that finished 10th or so from the bottom, or 21st overall, why don't I get at least a minuscule amount of odds towards picking first overall? We've seen in recent years teams leapfrogging others by virtue of the draft lottery. So I don't understand. I get that they want the attention, and the NFL draft is a monster ratings hit no matter what, but obviously people were starving for something to watch. But it wasn't like the NFL had to come up with, who's going to pick in what order. So I just think what they're embarking on here, that there's going to be a lot of protest, I would imagine, from a lot of GMs wondering, well, how is everything going to get sorted out? And I think it comes across to me as a little bit rushed for attention and such. It's funny because the Wings did manage on March 10th, so 2 days before the league shut down, to clinch 31st overall place. So, they're going to go into the draft with the best odds at 18.5%. And it's curious to me. I've been seeing on Twitter people saying, the Wings shouldn't be punished for, depending on how the draft order ends up being punished for, tanking the way they did. I watched 71 the 71 games they played this season. They were not deliberately tanking. They really were that bad. And I think you two have also watched their games. This was not a team that set out to tank. They really were as bad as they looked. So, I think it's a little bit unfair to accuse them of tanking. They were just legitimately that bad, and nobody needs a franchise player more than the Wings do.
Yeah, and just so everyone understands, the way the rules are set up now is that three teams, you have three different sort of lottery winners, first, second, and third place. And so even though the Red Wings are last in the standings, they could slide if they don't win one of the lottery picks, slide down to fourth. Under the old rules, which seems to be what we're going to adapt if we're going to do this, is you can only move up 4 spots. So only 5 teams would have a shot at the number one, and there's only going to be one change. So that would mean the worst the Red Wings could do would be second as opposed to fourth. And, the odds right now of them finishing in the top 3 are actually under the current rules are less than 50%. It's like 49 and change % to finish in the top 3, where, obviously it'll be a big difference if they adopt these new rules and we move, or actually the old rules, and we move the draft to June. So there could be an advantage, for the Red Wings here.
And to me, I'm 100% on board with Yzerman and other GMs who think this is a bad idea, because there's so many elements to the draft that make it entertaining, make it fun for fans, and for media to cover. And, like trades, how are you going to do a trade when you still don't know if the season's going to be finished or not? I think
Right.
the only way you can have this draft in June is if you're ready to say, okay, that's it. We're not playing the rest of the season. Let's get on with
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And until they give up the ghost on this season and concede that the logistics are not realistic, there's no like I agree that don't rush in and have the draft just for the sake of trying to create attention.
Helene, I want to ask you about your book, but before we move down that path, let me talk to you a little bit about the Red Wings. A couple of things that I'm curious about this summer, and I want to get your opinion on it. Obviously, Jimmy Howard appears is going to move on, and Bernier will be left behind. But would it serve the Wings, considering that there are veteran goalies, talented goalies that are going to be in the free agent market out there, and there aren't a lot of spots for those goalies to go. So they might be able to secure a veteran goalie at I don't know if it'll be a discount, but less than they normally could get. So given that they're a young team. And they could probably use a little confidence. Would it serve the Red Wings to go out and make a bid on a Braden Holtby or a Robin Lehner, hoping that a veteran guy could come in and help this younger team, even if it isn't quite ready to compete for a Stanley Cup?
That's an excellent point, and it's interesting because absolutely, I thought the same thing. Had discussions with my colleagues about. So if Jimmy Howard had been a little more like he was the previous season and given them, better goaltending. I mean, he was just so off the rails, right? I mean, he had not won a game since late October when the season shut down. His goal, he just could not seem to stop anything. And, with him in net, they'd be 5 goals behind halfway through the first period. And they're not a team that can come back from that, by any means. So how much of this season was affected by Jimmy struggling to the extent he did, and that, I mean, we all know DeKeyser is not a number one goaltender, except he is the Wings' top guy. They play. He had 8 games, and then they lost him by the end of October. If they'd been a little bit healthier, if they'd gotten a little bit better goaltending, what would their record look like? I think it's an intriguing idea, but it's in the whole thing again with the uncertainty because of the pandemic. Is the cap going to, at best, probably stays the same, right? At worst, it maybe contracts some. And if so, Wings have cap room. They're going to be able to go after somebody like Pietrangelo? Are they going to be able to make a splash? I mean, Steve would have to be a heck of a salesman because the Wings aren't like when he played for them, and he's not in Tampa Bay where he had a competitive team and a state with no income tax. I think, it could be interesting from that perspective. If other teams are handcuffed by the cap possibly contracting, is Steve going to have some money to blow on a marquee agent if he can convince them to come to Detroit?
Let me follow up on that if I can, Bob. But it was interesting last summer. The New York Rangers announced 2 seasons ago that they were in the midst of a rebuilding, and they brought in a lot of younger players. They've changed up their defense. Guys like D'Angelo is in, Adam Fox. I think we lost Helene there. Yeah. Yep, we did.
Oh, she'll be back in a minute.
Yeah. So anyway, what I'm curious about is, and I'll ask you this, Bob, because you've been around Detroit area for a long time. The New York Rangers were able to recruit Artemi Panarin to a rebuilding team. Okay, there she's back. Helene, this is for both you and Bob. The New York Rangers are a rebuilding team as well. But last summer, they were able to attract Artemi Panarin to join this young group of Rangers who are a pretty talented group. And boy, what a difference he made. Like, they're contending for the playoff spot. Like, they've kind of run out of road. Otherwise, I think they were going to end up in the playoffs. Maybe they still could, depending what happens when we resume the season. But, now that the Red Wings have Steve Yzerman, who has quite a great amount of respect around the league, do you think that he could sort of convince a guy like Pietrangelo or Braden Holtby to come and join under the guys that, look, believe in me. I know what I'm doing. Look what I did with Tampa. I built a team there. Just come with me and we'll have success. Can he do that?
I don't know with Panarin how much of the attraction was New York City. If there was something underlying there. Certainly, I mean, Little Caesars Arena is a great selling point from my perspective, including that they have a practice facility built in. I mean, it is a fantastic arena, so I think that's a selling point. Now, Detroit doesn't probably have the best reputation, although every player I know who's come here and played, they absolutely end up loving it, living here, and then a lot of them end up staying here after their careers end. So I think it depends, are there players who a marquee player knows in the area and who would recommend coming here? But I mean, Steve will certainly have some sway in with having his name as one of the selling points, but I still think you're looking at a team that needs a lot of help. And is it as attractive as, saying, hey, come live in New York City, if that's what the player is into?
I would say the difference in Tampa Bay was when Steve arrived there, he already had Steven Stamkos and Victor Hedman in place, and that's two pretty good building blocks to start with. He doesn't have that kind of talent here in Detroit to convince guys to come here. And I think part of the reason why the Wings are in this dilemma they're finding themselves in right now is because they tried to patchwork for too long when they should have just blown it up and realized this team isn't good enough to make the playoffs. They brought in veteran guys who made them a little bit better, but still not good enough to make the playoffs. And all they did was hurt their draft position and made it impossible to get that franchise-type player who can turn things around. So I don't think their mission is going to be to go out and get any kind of big-time free agents this summer, because I think they know they're going to get a great player in the draft this year, but one player isn't going to turn this thing around for the Red Wings. They need more help.
Right. You would think, Helene, that the priority for the Red Wings would be defense. That was obviously their worst position this season. But, saying that, if you look, and obviously Hronek, stepped up this season and played very well. In fact, kind of showed that he's a guy that's going to be a significant factor in the league. And Seider is already being sort of projected to be an instant top pairing defenseman as soon as he steps in. And then they added Lindstrom late in the season, who did not look out of place as well. Suddenly it looked a little bit better. Do you think the priority still will be on defense this summer? I saw your story where you looked at some of the top free agents, or would they be looking to try to add some help up front?
Well, they need help in every area, right? I mean, they need somebody to replace Jimmy Howard. They need more scoring help up front, but to me, on the back end, they need guys who can move the puck, who can get the puck to the forwards, and that was part of the problem last season. And they had so many injuries too, and that their defense was just not very good. Now going into next season, do you count on having DeKeyser, Hronek, Nemeth as three of your top four, and then is Seider ready already? I mean, he had a very good first year. Part of the unfortunate of the season having to shut down or go on pause was the Wings didn't get the opportunity. They were going to take a look at Moritz Seider, bring him up for a couple of games over those at some point in the 3 weeks that were left. So kind of to gauge, where's he at? Can he handle? He's 6'4", so I think the physicality of the game at the NHL level isn't going to deter him. But it's more, I mean, he's coming in at 19. Is he ready for the grind and such? So how much do you bank on that versus, again, I just think, depending on what happens with the cap, maybe the Wings are in a position to, take advantage of possibly other teams being constricted if the cap goes down. So I think defense very much, is still a primary concern for them.
So when you look at the Wings, I mean, as you say, they need something everywhere. Is it just, I mean, the fans aren't going to want to hear this, but do you almost have to write off next year again and say they're going to, even if they make incremental progress and are not as horrible as they were last year, look at that as a good thing? I mean, it seems illogical to think they could jump from 31st to playoff contention in 1 year.
Yeah, again, I come back to how different would this year be if they had two goaltenders who could both give them solid goaltending, enough to keep them in games. I mean, Bernier was their MVP from mid-December on, but even when he played really well, they still lost a lot of games. If De Keyser had been in the lineup, just stabilize that back end a little bit, I think, they could be better already next season if that happens. And Mantha missed 6 weeks after his incident with Jake Muzzin in Toronto right in January. That was at the end of December. He missed January into February. They can't afford to miss players like that. I mean, that's, to me, such a overriding thing about them right now. They have no depth. They lose De Keyser. They don't have the depth to replace him. They lose Anthony Mantha. They don't have the depth to make up for losing, their top goal scorer. And, on top of that, I mean, several players, and Andreas Athanasiou had a disappointing season. I mean, Applicator and Franz Nielsen were extremely disappointing, along with Jimmy Howard. I think they could be, I think they can be better next season, but they need health and they need some players to figure out, that they need to battle every night in order to be competitive.
Helene, before we let you go, you have a book out, the Big 50. Given the Red Wings' rich history, that had to be fun to write.
It was a lot of fun to write. So it's scheduled to come out in October. It's already available for pre-order on various sites, including Amazon. And so it's called The Big 50 Detroit Red Wings, the men and moments that made the Detroit Red Wings. And so you'll read about stuff about Gordy, Stevie, including a little tidbit about why he smiled the way he did with the 97 Cup and all the times he was almost traded. Nicholas Lidstrom, I have a sidebar in there on Marguerite Norris, who absolutely, along with the rest of her family, belongs in the Hockey Hall of Fame. The playoff streak, the home streak, lots of great stuff in there. It was a lot of fun to write, took up a lot of time last year, and it certainly also brought into focus, how fun this team, how much more skill and talent and personality there used to be on this team. I mean, they had it in spades back in the days. So it was a lot of fun. And, I got a lot of great cooperation from Steve and Nick Lidstrom, Chris Chelios, Scotty Bowman, calling me and sitting down with me. And the foreword is by Chris Osgood. So I'm very, very, very pleased with it. And I've also learned that a book manuscript is just like a boomerang. It keeps coming back to you for revisions and more additions and copy editing here and there. So, but we are in the final stretch.
Helene, I wish it was out right now because we could all use a little bit of hockey reading to occupy our time these days. But thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We appreciate your insight, and hopefully we can have you back when the draft comes around, and we can talk about what the Red Wings did do at the NHL draft.
Okay, but next time I'm on, you have to promise that Stevie Y is on, your dog.
Yes, my dog, my pit bull is indeed named Stevie Y. So,
is he available for interviews?
Pardon me?
Is he available for interviews?
He is always available, or she is always available for interviews, but she is not right at this present because she's out on the porch barking at a lawnmower that's revved up next door. So we'll have her on next time.
So she's pretty. A lot of grit to her game.
Yes. For sure. For sure. All right. Thanks, Helene, for joining us.
Thank you.
Anytime, guys.
You're on.
All right. That's Helene St. James of Detroit Free Press. And, Bob, that's, kind of interesting about what the Red Wings might do this summer, because I actually think that you can recruit if you're Steve Yzerman. I know from talking to people that have played for Steve is that when he sits down, it's kind of like the old E.F. Hutton commercials. When he talks, everybody does listen. And it's because of the way he played the game, where, he went from being an offensive star, and they completely changed the way his perspective on the game and the way he approached the game, and became kind of a gritty two-way forward. So he's seen every aspect of it. He's been a guy who's dominated, and then of course he's gone into management. And as you said, he had some assets that were there on which to build. But if you look at the team that's still there today, it's his fingerprints are still all over it. And they haven't won a cup, but they've been a very good team for a long time. So it'll be interesting if they will go after the goalie this summer, because there's not going to be landing spots for all the goalies that are available, in my opinion. So do they want to do that, or maybe they just go with Bernier, who, and Helene was right. Don't you think he was the MVP in the second half? I thought he played extremely well for him.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say the year before, Howard was their MVP.
Right.
Their goaltending kept them in a lot of games they had no right being in for 2 years in a row. And they almost, as bad as they were, you think if they didn't get the kind of goaltending they got the last couple of years, how much worse would it have been? And you wouldn't think it could get much worse, but it can always get worse. That's one of my mottos in life. Never say it can't get any worse than this, because it always can.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I would say is, Helene brought up tanking, and I would say that Steve Yzerman is not disappointed by the way this season went. And I said all along, like, if Steve, like, this team didn't have to be the 31st team in the NHL. And I think if Ken Holland had been there, just because I think his mandate was different, he was trying to bring it back to life, quickly. Where Steve Yzerman's mandate is a much longer term. I think Holland would have plugged the holes on defense. He would have brought in some guys, and they would have been more competitive than they were, because there was a period when they were playing with a really inferior defense, and I think Holland would have tried to plug the holes. Where I think Steve, once that happened, was content to let it ride out and let the chips fall where they may, because he knew in the long run that would help the team by, as you said, being in a position to get a premium prospect as opposed to just a good one.
Yeah, and I think, as I said earlier, I think that was part of what's put them where they are at right now, because they did try to patchwork. Originally, it was, they wanted to maintain the playoff streak, and you would have thought once the playoff streak ended, then they would say, okay, we got to blow this thing up and rebuild. But they kept bringing in guys, and some of those guys are anchors now. Like Helene mentioned, Franz Nielsen, great guy, love the guy, but let's face it, he's not the player anywhere near the player he was, and they're stuck with him for a few more years yet on that contract.
Well, yeah, I agree, and you know what? I didn't see that one coming. Nielsen was a very good player for the New York Islanders. And, he had a little bit of sparkle to his game with the Islanders. He was he was sort of a poor man's Datsuk. And by that, I mean only that he was a two-way guy. He played really good defense. He could pick your pocket. But, he had the ability to score 20 goals, and he could pass really well. Now, not at Datsuk's level, but, he was that style of player. And he's come over to the Red Wings and really just fizzled. Just hasn't been anywhere near the player he was. Like, I don't know if it was a comfort factor or the way they used him on Long Island, but he clearly is not the same player, not even remotely close. And he wasn't even the first season that he was with the team. He just seemed to be out of his element as soon as he got to Detroit.
I think you're right that Yzerman could probably convince a couple of veteran guys to come to Detroit, because they would see his track record, and he has built winners everywhere he's been. Even if you look at the success he had working with the Canadian team, now you could say anybody could win with Canada, but other guys didn't when they
right.
And so, but I think the question is, do you want to do that? Do you want to get that much better? That where you like. Do you want to be a team that's a bubble playoff team, maybe in and out every year, or do you want to make that leap? Like, as much as people talk about Crosby going to Pittsburgh or Kane going to Chicago, Kane alone wouldn't have won it in Chicago. They added Kane, they added Taves, they added Seabrook, they added Keith. It was an ongoing process. It didn't happen with one draft. And Crosby probably doesn't win the cups he's won without Malkin, and Fleury and Letang. You've got to have that core. This isn't the NBA where one or two guys can win you a championship. You need a team, and the Wings are still far away from having any semblance of a team that I think you can even consider as a chance to get in the playoffs, let alone to contend.
Well, you say that, and then look at the New York Rangers. like the New York Rangers announced 2 years ago, well, we're rebuilding, and they shuffled out some folks, and all of a sudden Adam Fox was brought in, a real good young player. D'Angelo was given a chance to play and took advantage of it. They've moved some people around, and then all of a sudden, when their defense looked a little better, they've given younger goalies a chance. Now Henrik Lundqvist is the odd person out, and then they were able to get Panarin. And Helene was right. I mean, I think the Big Apple is a lure in itself, and I think Panarin wanted to go there. There's a large Russian population in that area, and I think he just felt like he was going to be more comfortable there. But then all of a sudden you decide to keep Chris Kreider. Everything changes. So could the Red Wings, if they got a goalie to stay, they're not going to convince, in my opinion, Pietrangelo to come to Detroit and be their top pairing defenseman. I just don't see that happening. He's going to go to a contender, I would guess. But could they, land some other veteran player to come here? A guy that maybe has won before, or a guy that just wants a contract that will set him up for life. I mean, I think that's possible. If the Rangers, certainly did a quick turnaround, and Adam Fox is a premium player, but D'Angelo also helped as well. But it's not like they've done a lot in New York, and suddenly they're right there where I think they feel like they need to be.
They did have some pieces in place. Lundqvist was certainly an elite goaltender, one of the best in the league, and I'm sure that played a role when you're looking at getting free agents. And the thing about the Rangers is, I think a lot of players are willing to go there because if the Rangers have a shot, even in the cap era, they've still found a way to make that big bold move. It doesn't always work out for them. When they brought in Eric Stahl a couple of years back, it didn't pan out. But you look at their history, even going back to when they acquired Howie Morenz in the 30s, the Rangers have always been that team that's willing to make that bold move to try to win. And, the fact they've only won a few cups shows most times it doesn't work, but they certainly aren't afraid to try. And I think that is something, when players see that, they know, if I go there and we've got a shot, they're going to give it everything they got to try to get over that hump. And I think that's a big attraction, as much as it is about, who wouldn't want to live in New York City, make tons of money and be a big fish in the big pond. But it also, I think, has to do with that. They know the Rangers are the type of organization that is going to do everything they can to try to win.
Yeah. Well, and I don't disagree that the Red Wings are farther away. They're farther away than the Rangers were when they did it. Everyone talks about the defense, but the defense is, I think, starting to get a little bit of hope, just because I thought Lindstrom didn't look out of place, and it's pretty clear that Hronek and Seider are going to be, higher level defensemen, and I think McIsaac it's going to be a player as well. So, all of a sudden you look like you got four guys that are going to be on this team for a lengthy period of time. So that's a little bit better. But really, last season, if the Red Wings top line didn't score, they had nothing. They had zero scoring. And, that's not going to change much, next year. They have basically 4 or 5 credible players, up front. And obviously you need 12.
Yeah, and if they get Lafreniere, obviously that gives them another one. And if they get
right,
he could be like a Kirby Dach, where it may take, Kirby Dach didn't exactly light it up this year, but I don't think the Blackhawks are ready to give up on him either.
That
kind of player that might take a couple of years to kind of acclimatize himself to the NHL, whereas I would think Lafreniere is going to hit the ground running.
Yeah, he would, but I'd be careful on that. I mean, Jack Hughes is a terrifically talented player, and so is the Rangers. Capo is an incredible player as well, and they didn't light it up. This is still a league that You got to have just more than talent. I think those guys were so young that they just couldn't get it done. So we got to be careful with the expectations. But yeah, I would say this though: if I was a Red Wings season ticket holder, if the Red Wings get Lafreniere, I would be deeply disappointed if he wasn't on the team next season. Because
if he wasn't on the team next season.
Pardon me?
I'd be shocked if he wasn't on the team.
Yeah, no, I would as well. Although, in the old days, the Red Wings always felt like, you need to ripen a little bit before you get there. Even in Nashville, David Boyle has a very similar approach. You got to spend time in Milwaukee before you come up. So it'll be interesting to see. I like the idea of getting a veteran goalie because I think even a young team, and you brought it up before, it helped the Rangers that they had Lundqvist when they were going through this kind of change because he gave even the younger players some confidence. So it'd be nice if they, and maybe the cost would be too high, and will they even be able to convince them to do that? But the only way I could see it happening would be, like I said, if the music stopped and there were no chairs left, and for these goalies to go to, because obviously Corey Crawford's going to be out there, Holtby's going to be out there, Robin Leonard's going to be out there, and I'm forgetting one or two more. But to me, there's like 5 goalies, and like 3 spots. So it's going to be interesting to see, kind of what happens. What did you think of Joe Thornton cutting his hair?
I like the video, kind of the I Dream of Jeannie thing that his daughter did when they did the blink and the beard was gone. And I guess everybody else, like you, for instance, are growing beards. So Joe Thornton, wanted to be different, so he shaved his off.
Yeah, I was not a big fan of the Civil War reenactor look. I don't like it for baseball. I certainly don't like it for hockey. And I guess Brent Burns would be next. The other thing, too, people who wrote about Joe Thornton's great video, and I highly recommend everybody go see it if you got a chance because it's fun. And his daughter helped him do it. But when they wrote the story, the writers, a lot of them didn't explain what I Dream of Jeannie was. And of course, you got to be our age to kind of have remembered that TV series. And I'm sure there are some people in their 30s that are wondering, what are you talking about? I Dream of Jeannie. So anyway,
last week, Tom Lester died. And Tom Lester, for those who don't know, was Eb Dawson on Green Acres, which was another show from the same era. And I was stunned to find this out, that he was the last surviving cast member from Green Acres. They're all gone now. And
wow.
The same era, basically, as I Dream of Jeannie. So, as you say, that was a long time ago.
Yes, it was, indeed. Anyway, we appreciate you joining HockeyDebates.com. Join us later in the week. We'll have another guest, and we'll talk more hockey. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us.